Okay, hi, I'm Heidi Knock, and I'm a psychologist on the polytrauma unit at the Richard L. Rodebush VA Medical Center in Indianapolis, and we're going to be talking today about combat veterans who are returning and different symptoms they have, but particularly traumatic brain injury and then PTSD. So I'm going to start with the TBI piece, and then we're going to talk about PTSD. And then we're going to try to talk about some ways to cope with some of these symptoms. My contact information is on this first slide. If you ever need to get a hold of me for anything, please feel free to do so. So the first thing we're going to talk about is mild traumatic brain injury, and about 80% of all brain injuries are mild. And each different category of brain injury has a different definition of it. So when we're talking about mild traumatic brain injury, we're really talking about somebody who has suffered an injury to their head. Either they've hit their head against something or something has hit them in the head. And for mild traumatic brain injury, which is 80% of all injuries, people do not lose consciousness for more than 30 minutes. If it's 30 minutes or more, then we're probably talking about either a moderate or severe head injury. But for people who have mild traumatic brain injury, they typically can have loss of memory for events either before the injury or after. But with mild traumatic brain injury, we wouldn't expect there to be more than a 24-hour loss of memory on either side. So if I got injured, this afternoon, I might not remember what happened last night or later on today, but I certainly should be able to remember the next day and thereafter. They can also have an alteration of mental state at the time of the accident, and I'll talk to you a little bit more about what that means in a minute. When we're talking about mild traumatic brain injury, there are two types. Well, brain injury in general. There's either a closed head injury where nothing penetrates the skull, or there's an open head injury where something does penetrate the skull. So, for example, what you see here is a contra coup injury where somebody maybe has hit their head against the steering wheel, but that typically is a closed head injury, meaning the skull is not penetrated or compromised in any way. But an example of an open head injury would be like a gunshot wound to the head or something like that. But in other words, to have a TBI, we're really talking about some external sort of force injures or causes injury to the brain. One mechanism of injury to the brain can be what we call diffuse axonal injury. And this can happen in car accidents. It can also happen with our combat veterans with blast injuries. And what that is like when a blast wave goes through their brain, it can cause microscopic tearing or shearing at the axonal level. So sometimes this can't even be seen on imaging, but what that can cause is some kind of diffuse symptoms of cognitive impairment throughout the brain. This next slide is about blast injury. So they're really just studying blast injury right now, but they're not finding that it's a lot different outcome or consequences or course of recovery than any other type of brain injury. So the blast wave injury has a similar course of recovery as does like a car accident or getting hit in the head by a baseball bat or something like that. But the difference with blast injury is the mechanism in which people get injured. So if we have a blast wave go through a room, we would expect that blast wave to go through different densities of material at different rates. So it'll go through the air at a different rate than it would go through my body, and it would go through my body at a different rate than it would, say, the wall or desk in my office. So when you think about your body is made up of different density of bone, tissue, fluids. So that causes that blast wave to go through your body at different rates of speed, and that's what causes a lot of that twisting and tearing in the brain and can cause obviously damage to internal organs as well. That's why we find a lot of combat veterans do have like injury to different organs in their body and can get like brain bleeds, brain injury from these blast waves, even when there isn't a lot of external evidence that they're having this brain injury. So not only do people get shearing and tearing of the axons in their brain from these type of blast injuries, but we also see that there's some secondary and tertiary injuries, such as, fragments. If somebody has like a mortar come down around them, the mortar will hit and the shrapnel will go up and out, injuring people. People can be obviously from blast waves thrown backwards, thrown against walls, objects, all sorts of things. And crush injuries where things fall on people. So this next slide is something I'm going to go over a little bit more carefully. So these are really the criteria for mild, moderate, and severe brain injury. So even if you talk to somebody who has a mild TBI, to them, their symptoms do not sound mild. So a lot of times you're going to get somebody react and say, oh, well, my symptoms are not mild. It's like, you know, there is a category for each one, and explaining that to them and educating them on that can help. So if we look at this first line, you see the GCS, that's a Glasgow Coma scale. That's a term that medical people use. So this is really helpful if you're working with somebody kind of a long time after they've been injured and you find out what their initial Glasgow Coma scale was. That'll tell you pretty much how badly they were injured. So if you're a person who hasn't been injured a lot and or had severe, you know, significant concussions or anything, right now, most of the people who are listening to the seminar should have a Glasgow Coma scale of 15, meaning they can enact on their environment, they can respond to verbal stimuli, they can self-initiate movement, coordination, all these different things. In other words, we're pretty much a fully functioning person. But the lower the scale, the less they're able to do that, to the point where, like, if you're come in and your Glasgow Coma scale is a 3, you're in a coma, basically. You're unresponsive to any stimuli, you're not initiating anything, you're laying there and you're out. So that kind of range between 15 and 3 is what the Glasgow Coma scale is. So if you had somebody who was in the hospital and they were in a coma and their Glasgow Coma scale was 3, 3, 3, and then eventually 4, you know that they were having a lot of problems and gradually working their way up. So for mild traumatic brain injury, you can't be unconscious more than 30 minutes. And we use this criteria really when we're assessing people and we're asking them questions to figure out really how bad was their injury. If it's 30 minutes or less, it's going to be a mild traumatic brain injury. And what I want you to understand about brain injury is synonymous with concussion. So there's mild, moderate, and severe concussions, and there's grade 1, 2, and 3. They're the same things. So loss of consciousness for mild traumatic brain injury is usually 30 minutes or less. You can see the more severe the injury, the longer the period of unconsciousness. So moderate, 30 minutes to 6 hours, severe, 6 hours or more. And people can, you know, be in a coma for months and have unconsciousness for months at a time, right? So post-traumatic amnesia is how much memory loss do we expect the person to have after the time of injury. So people can lose periods of time both before the injury and after the injury, either or both. So again, the more severe the injury, the more time or the more amnesia we would expect with people. It's very interesting because if I get somebody on our inpatient unit here who suffered a moderate or severe injury, they may be hospitalized for days or even weeks on end, and they can be up talking and interacting with people, but then they get out of the hospital and they'll come to outpatient treatment and they'll say, well, go Heidi, I don't even remember being in the hospital. Even though they were up and talking with staff and interacting, they have that amnesia. So with a severe injury, they could be hospitalized for weeks, and then later on, they don't remember any of their hospitalizations. So this like kind of severe memory loss. So with mild traumatic brain injury, we go into neuroimaging findings. Now, typically, no, that's not going to show up on imaging. With moderate or severe, we would expect at least some dense, you know, some darkened areas on the imaging, bruising, bleeding, some of that, okay? For all of these, they're going to have an altered state, mental state at the time of injury. And the next slide is going to explain what that is. So with all of these, from the time of injury, they should have some of these symptoms. So if you get somebody in your office who says, I've had this, you know, I think I've got these concussion and I've got these symptoms, one of the questions should be, well, did the symptoms start right after this injury? And if they say, no, you know, I was okay, and then about 4 or 5 months later, I started having these symptoms, those symptoms are probably not related to their brain injury. They will have these symptoms from the day they get injured forward. And if there's a big gap in between, it's probably something else causing it. Sleep deprivation, untreated sleep apnea, you know, thyroid issues, etc. Some medical condition or some other psychiatric condition such as, you know, anxiety, depression could be causing it instead. So if we look at what an altered mental state is after an accident, here's the kind of things we might see. If we get on scene, like if I came on a scene of somebody had just gotten blown up in combat, the things that I might expect to see would be like they might be dazed, they might not be able to answer questions congruently, they may have bleeding from their ears, they may be dizzy, they may be stumbling, they may have blurred vision, they may be fatigued on scene. So these are the type of symptoms that we're looking for, and you can just read down this list for yourself, but some sort of altered mental state starting directly after the time of the injury is what we're looking for. So people always ask me, well, Heidi, if you can't, see mild traumatic brain injury on imaging, then how are you going to, really figure this out? So probably the number one thing that we use here is neuropsych testing. Neuropsych testing will take a snapshot of different cognitive domains across several tests. And when you see the same problem, like if I see attention on, 2 or 3 different neuropsych neuropsych tests, then I know that we've probably got an issue going on there. So either a neuropsychologist can diagnose a TBI, a neurologist can give a neurological exam, obviously they're qualified to give a TBI diagnosis, or a physiatrist, and a physiatrist is a rehabilitation doctor who specializes in rehabilitation. So those are the people who really should be diagnosing TBI. A lot of people, I think diagnoses go in trends. Everybody thought they were ADHD for a while. Everybody thought they were bipolar. TBI is kind of one of the newer things where we have a lot of people coming in and saying, hey, I think I have a TBI. And the truth is so many things just kind of look the same as TBI. So just as a layperson, I'm a clinical psychologist, not a neuropsychologist. I never diagnose TBI myself. I rely on the neurologist, neuropsych testing, or the physiatrist to do that for me. So some of the things I listed down here, almost all combat veterans, if they went outside the wire, have been exposed to explosions of some sort. That doesn't mean that they were in close enough proximity or got injured enough to actually have a brain injury. And a lot of people have these symptoms for other things, like we already talked about. Sleep deprivation is probably number one. Like if people are sleep deprived, and we all get to a point like when we're so tired at night, we just can't think straight, we can't process, we can't remember well. When you're chronically sleep deprived, like a lot of these combat veterans are who are coming in with PTSD, you're going to have these type of symptoms. Anxiety and stress just kind of overloads the circuitry and shut down focus and memory and things like that. And then nutritional issues. Sleep apnea is a huge thing among our combat veterans. Untreated sleep apnea looks much the same as TBI, memory problems, focus problems, fatigue, these type of things. And then any uncontrolled medical conditions like diabetes, thyroid, testosterone. So when you do get somebody coming in who looks, complaining of these things, of TBI, don't, tell them, hey, these things can overlap. A lot of good education up front can, if somebody does, like, let's say we send them a neuropsych testing or a neurologist, and the neurologist says, no, we don't think they have a TBI, we can do a lot of good education about all these secondary factors that could kind of look like or mimic TBI symptoms. The other thing we know is that concussions heal up. So most mild traumatic brain injury should fully heal within 6 to 12 months. If people sustain moderate or severe, they're most likely to have lifelong symptoms. But with mild, there should be 100% recovery from that. So there's all sorts of symptoms that I could cover with traumatic brain injury. Literally anything the brain can do can be injured. So I just want you to know, it doesn't matter, if somebody can have a brain injury and suddenly they can't spell, they don't have depth perception, they can't judge the size of objects anymore, they can't come up with words. There's all sorts of symptoms that you can have with brain injury, but I'm just going to go over the ones that you most likely will see. And the other thing I'm going to tell you is, like, somebody with a brain injury could have all of these symptoms, or they could have just one of them. It just depends on locality in the brain and how severe their brain injury is. So even though I'm going over all this, it doesn't mean every person you meet is going to have these symptoms. So let's start with the cognitive symptoms. By far, the number one symptom that I hear in my office is short-term memory problems. So there's a difference between short-term and long-term memory. People can often remember things that from long ago, like they might be able to tell you who they took to prom, when they were in high school, but they can't tell you what happened today or what they ate for lunch even yesterday. Like they have trouble putting in new information into their memory. That's short-term memory problems. They have a lot of problems with attention. They're easily distracted by stimuli in the environment. I think that's really important to know, especially if you're a clinician, because if you're going to treat people with TBI, you really want to have them in a quieter area, away from distractions, because if they're not looking at you and you're not checking in with them every once in a while, hey, what did you understand? What did you hear me say? And just kind of spit back their kind of gist of the thing, they're probably not listening to you. Some combat veterans that you have are going to have processing speed issues, and I think like the worst thing that combat veterans feel is that they feel like people think they're stupid or mentally disabled as soon as they tell them that they have a TBI. Most people don't really understand TBI in the environment. So if you have somebody with processing speed issues, slow down, chunk the information, give them time to catch up, like I'm doing now. When we think about brain injury, we're really talking about pockets of functioning. So people can have an injury like a frontal lobe injury, a temporal lobe injury, whatever, and there'll be some impairment related to those areas of their brain, but everything else can be largely intact. So psychologically, people with brain injury are often very depressed. They know who they were and they know how they are now. So they're really struggling with this sense of loss that they have, struggling with letting go of this person they used to be, and maybe are not going to be able to return to that same level of functioning. So they kind of get stuck there sometimes. You might meet somebody with a brain injury and you have no idea they have a brain injury. They look fine to you. You can't tell on the outside, but they know. They have a sense of loss and they struggle with that a lot. So we have to kind of help people with like dealing with the grief of brain injury, but we also have to have them, I like to say, workarounds, find ways to work around their symptoms so that they can still function and do whatever they need to do. We have to have like a very adaptive attitude. Okay, you've got this. This is a symptom. Like, how are we going to adapt around it so that you can still do things, even if it's harder and takes longer? People with TBI often have some anxiety. They feel like people think they're stupid. Like, let's say somebody has a temporal lobe injury, which is like your speech center over on the left-hand side. And suddenly they can't find words, and, you know, they take long pauses and they can't, you know, come up with something to say. Well, what happens is people will guess words for them, or they'll look at them like, what's going on? And so they have a lot of anxiety. If their processing speed is slow, maybe they can't keep up with conversations. So they're missing half of what people are saying to them. Or they're just their self-esteem has been damaged because everything's just so much harder for them now. So just a lot of anxiety and depression with these types of injuries, and getting people to adapt and finding a new direction to go with their injury, embracing their injury. People sometimes can be very irritable with TBI, especially frontal lobe injury. So I think one thing that's kind of interesting is frontal lobe injury is more prominent than the other types. The brain can be injured in multiple ways, and any part of your brain can be injured, absolutely any part of it. But frontal lobe injuries are more common just because our brain floats in cerebral spinal fluid. And so if we hit our head again at a stationary object, our brain can actually go back and forth in our skull, crashing against the front and crashing against the back. So in the front of our skull, there are actually little bony protrusions that stick out over our orbital eye sockets. And so when the brain crashes into that, it's much more likely to cause some of these frontal lobe issues that we're seeing here. So with this irritability, with the focus, with planning, organizing, impulsivity, these type of things, we're seeing that a lot more. These executive functioning, attention issues go more with the frontal lobe injury. So we'll see people who are irritable, and they're kind of neurologically irritable. They just have trouble pulling back from their irritability, and it's really more neurological in nature. So we have to teach them the same sort of things we would with people with anger management to get recognized when they're starting to get irritable, maybe using physical symptoms or whatever. So most people with TBI issues have some sleep issues. I'll tell you, there's just a lot higher rate of sleep apnea with people. So I would, if you have somebody who you know has a TBI or a documented TBI, I would ask them to go get a sleep study, especially if they're real tired during the day or they're having memory or focus problems, because this could be a lot of their problems. So, but sleep apnea is very common. Sometimes we'll see a higher rate of narcolepsy, and we'll definitely see disrupted sleep patterns, like the circadian rhythm just gets off due to the TBI. We can see a lot of personality change with TBI, especially the more severe. The more severe, we have like kind of two directions people can go. Some people get that disinhibited type of personality change, where they're really kind of over animated, impulsive, easily agitated. Or we can get kind of an inhibited type of TBI, where people are more subdued. They give you one-word answers. They look almost flat and depressed, but it's more neurological in nature. But it'll seem like a depression because they'll be very unanimated, only give you one-word answers, very often very flat speech. It doesn't mean they don't have any prosody, but usually not a lot of prosody to their speech. Physical symptoms, almost every vet that I have come in here has chronic headaches, That's one of the #1 symptoms. TBI is notorious for giving people headaches. A lot of this is from light and sound sensitivity. Once the brain is injured, it can't screen out light and sound as easily. So people with TBI often get overstimulated very easily. The other thing we see with combat veterans who have been in blast wave injury, it often damages the muscles in their eyes, and their eyes don't move together. It's called nystagmus. And so anybody who comes in that I know has a TBI and they're having headaches, I'm going to get them into a neuro-optometrist immediately, because I want to see if the muscle movements or their eye movements aren't syncing exactly. You might not be able to see it externally if you're not a professional eye person, but the eyes don't move exactly the same, and it causes a lot of their headache issues, and that can be treated with like filtered lenses and prisms in their glasses. People who have had headaches for years, sometimes even decades, get those glasses and their headaches reduce significantly. So the other thing is they can have dizziness. Our, blast waves, our vestibular system is responsible for our balance, for our coordination, but our balance and dizziness. So if you have like blast waves that blow out the eardrums or damage the vestibular system in any type of way, then you can have people who get dizzy, kind of run into walls sometimes. Neurological damage. And the last thing is fatigue. So one of the things we really talk about with brain injury is energy management with people who have had a traumatic brain injury. So we all have a wall of fatigue. Like around 9 or 10 o'clock at night, I hit my wall and I'm just like, man, I'm so tired, I almost can't process. But for people with TBI, they're usually going to hit that wall around 2 or 3 o'clock in the afternoon. It takes a lot more energy for them to focus, to process, to remember things. They have to work extra hard to compensate for their cognitive symptoms. So they hit that wall of fatigue a lot sooner. So we usually talk about doing more cognitively challenging things in the morning, and we talk about like kind of energy management. And sometimes people who have TBI, if they have a busy family life and they have to do things in the evening, like, to go to their kids' sporting events or whatever, then we have them take like a time-limited 30 to 60-minute nap in the afternoon to help compensate for that. So the course of recovery for mild traumatic brain injury, usually within 6 to 12 months, people should recover from their brain injury if it's mild. Now, they are studying, I'm sure you guys have all heard of the chronic traumatic encephalitis. If people sustain multiple concussions, especially if they sustain a second or third one before the first one heals up, they can have some longer lasting effects. I went to the Michigan Brain Injury Association conference, and they said about 30% of people who have multiple mild traumatic brain injuries can have some lasting symptoms, but they're usually still not that severe, but to the person they seem severe, right? But again, like I said before, if people have moderate or severe brain injuries, then they're probably more likely to have lifelong symptoms per that chart that we went over. Combat veterans have a lot of physical pain. They carry 100 pounds of gear. When I first started at the VA, they had somebody bring in a flak jacket, which had those chicken plates, those ceramic plates in it. Oh my gosh, it was so heavy. It's kind of like 100 pounds is kind of like carrying around an 8-pound child, not an 8-pound, an 8-year-old child on your back all the time. So imagine doing that. And then those helmets that they wear are, somewhere between 10 and 15 pounds. So just the wear and tear on their necks, the back pain, trying to run and wearing this gear 24/7 in these confined spaces, and when they're running and clearing houses, very hard on the body. So we just see a lot of chronic headaches. We see a lot of back injury. We see a lot of back spasming, knee pain, these sorts of things. So chronic pain just seems to go hand in hand with people who have been in combat. So now I'm going to kind of move into post-traumatic stress disorder, and then we're going to look at, dealing with these symptoms at the end a little bit more. But obviously, I'm not going to go over the criteria for PTSD. I'm going to try to go over it more like, what do we see specifically in combat veterans? So combat veterans are a little bit different than most people with PTSD. Obviously, they're exposed to typically numerous life-threatening situations, both for themselves and witnessing it for other people. So they really have what we would call complex PTSD. Even though there's green zones over in the combat zone, there's really no safe areas, because even if you're on a base, you're still going to get mortared, there's still going to be snipers, and there's still going to be vehicle-borne IEDs, which they call VBIDs, and those are bombs that are in cars where the vehicles or the trucks try to run the gates or run through barricades to cause massive explosions and loss of life. So there really isn't a safe place. So combat veterans are in danger 24/7, and they never know who is around and whether the people are good or bad, and that's a real problem. So, you know, we're supposed to be over there winning the hearts and minds. So guess what we do? We let, you know, the local nationals on our base to do, you know, different tasks, whether it's being in the chow hall or doing cleaning or help running areas of the base. We also train with the national armies and the national police to train them to take over their countries. So, but they're often insurgents, you know, in those populations. So the very people that our men are training with will go home at night and then give intel about the bases, where to border, what missions they're going to be on so that they can attack them. So, you know, most people come into your office say, I don't trust anybody. Because when they were in a combat zone, you didn't know who was good, who was bad. Every person was a possible enemy, and that includes women and children. They, unfortunately, overseas, they send kids out to stop convoys. So unless our men want to be stopped and killed and ambushed, they have to run over these kids. They put bomb vests on kids. So they have our soldiers and our military, not just soldiers, but all branches, are put into situations where they have to take the lives of women and children. Our men come home with a lot of guilt about taking lives, about killing children, about seeing their friends being killed. So I just want you to understand there's really no place that's safe over there. You can't trust anyone, and that mentality just doesn't turn off when you come home. So you're going to see a lot of people who come into your office, if they're combat veterans, where they don't want to go out. They think the environment's completely unsafe. They think people are horrible. They've seen the worst in people and they've seen the worst in themselves, and they just are very isolated. So that's what we get a lot in our office. So, you know, these are the actual criteria for PTSD. You already know those. Of course, they're going to have recurrent nightmares, fight or flight symptoms. And I think that's one thing that we really want to do is educate people when they come in about the symptoms of PTSD. If you interview somebody and they meet criteria and then you don't explain to them their symptoms, well, then they really never understand it. It's not just for diagnosis you're going to do that. You're going to use your knowledge of PTSD to help them explain what's going on with them. A lot of our vets don't know, like, oh my gosh, you're getting triggered, and these adrenaline rushes and this agitation you're feeling is because something's reminding your body of combat. So we have to kind of educate them about that. They, of course, have recurrent nightmares over combat, and we see that they go from kind of real events, and the longer they're home, usually there's kind of a morphing between, like, their families sometimes in it, or there's combat dreams here in the United States, but there's still combat dreams about they're either being hunted or they're hunting someone. Almost always are the themes. So we know that they have flashbacks. That's pretty important. They lose orientation. Again, if you're a clinician who deals with somebody who's having a flashback, I'm sure you learned this in, you know, basic PTSD training 101, but don't ever touch somebody who is in a dissociative state or having a flashback, because they may think you're an insurgent. You know, I've had vets pull guns on their wives and have them get down on their knees and with their hands behind their head before they pulled out of it. I've had vets try to stab their wives, choke them during these dissociative events. So in the history of never has anybody ever attacked me. I've been doing my job here at the VA for 13 years, so I don't ever want you to be afraid of treating a combat veteran. They are probably the most polite people. They call me ma'am. They listen to me. They're motivated to change. They really appreciate somebody who talks to them very straightforward and educates them and tells them how to deal with their symptoms. So I don't want you to be afraid of being attacked, but realize, like, if somebody's in a flashback, they think they're back there. They think they're in a combat situation. So if you touch them, you become part of that situation. So just make sure you don't do that. What I'd recommend is, like, you throw a pillow or you know, a stress ball, call their name, say, hey, come out of it. I'm Heidi. Your name's Steve. We're here in the United States, whatever. Just try to orient them back through sound. And if you have to throw something at them, be far enough away from them that you don't become part of that scene. But what we find is veterans experience intense psychological distress or bodily reactions to triggers, and they can be anything so subtle. And I'm going to go over a few examples to help you, but it could be smells, sounds, physical sensations. I have people who have trouble driving over bridges because the bridges vibrate and it feels like the blast when they're in blasts. Common triggers are heat in the summer. People don't even think about that. Getting into a stuffy vehicle. Diesel fuel smells, sulfur or gunpowder smells. Fireworks is probably a no-brainer. loud noises, Middle Eastern music, foreign language of any sort. Middle Eastern people are a huge trigger. And we just have to remember that's not really a racism for them. It's like if you're hunted by a group of people and they speak a certain language, they smell a certain way, they dress a certain way, when you see that, you're going to become instantly fearful. It's a trigger for them. So not really a racist thing, but more getting just physically keyed up whenever they see them. They don't trust them, they're frightened of them, they're worried about what's going to happen around them. So whenever people are exposed to anything that reminds them of combat, they're going to have fight or flight symptoms. And I usually just kind of rattle those off for my combat veterans when they come in so they understand it. And those include fullness in the head because blood pressure elevates during fight or flight because of arterial constrictions. They can have headaches because of that. So you're going to find a lot of combat veterans have headaches chronically, and it's really because of these blood pressure elevations related to fight or flight symptoms. So they can learn to control those, right? They can have muscle tension, they can have hearing changes. If they have tinnitus, one common symptom of fight or flight is their ringing in their ears goes very high in volume suddenly or goes up in pitch. Dry mouth sometimes, tension in their neck and shoulders, racing heart, breathing shallowly, and adrenaline drop. So I always educate vets about that because when they're having that, that's a sign that something in their environment has reminded them of combat. They're having a triggering or a fight or flight episode. And then what's going to happen is they're going to get anxious. And when they feel too anxious, they're probably going to become angry to pull back from that anxious feeling. So we have to kind of educate them on that cycle. Fight or flight symptoms happened when they were in danger in combat. So they kind of feel like fight or flight means, oh, something bad's about to happen. I'm in danger. And they become more vigilant, and then they get kind of an aggressive mindset. So we really have to get them to understand that fight or flight symptoms are really related to benign things in their environment. I had a guy, every time he talked about his IED blast, he used to be a gunner in a turret, and he'd sit on the strap, and when you sit on that strap for hours, it cuts off the circulation in your legs, and his legs would go numb overseas. So in my office, whenever he'd start talking about his trauma, his legs would go numb, and that really freaked him out. So I had to explain to him, like, whenever you talk about your trauma, you're gonna have memory activation. And what I mean by that is you're gonna have some of the same sensory experiences you had during that time. So if I had somebody who's shot in the chest by a sniper, which I did, as soon as you talk about your trauma, his chest is gonna hurt. If I had somebody who, was dealing with his body exploding right next to him and there was blood everywhere, including on his face and in his mouth, he might taste blood when he's talking about that incident. So we can have, those aren't exactly hallucinations. People can hear combat congruent things like explosion, Arabic language, people screaming. If it goes along with their PTSD symptoms or times when they're being triggered, it's probably more like a memory activation than it is actually hallucination. And so we just have to keep that in mind. I hate to call people a psychotic when really they're having these physical and sensory memory activation episodes. So, of course, every combat veteran doesn't like to talk about their trauma. They especially don't like to talk to people who haven't been in combat or who aren't veterans. So I just want to warn you, if you're a civilian provider and you haven't been to combat, it's going to take a little longer to build rapport. I think going over their PTSD symptoms and talking to them like this helps them know that you know their symptoms and you understand what they're experiencing and what might be causing it. And then you could build a lot of rapport very quickly with them. So we often see triggering for combat veterans can include unpredictable situations. Like, let's say they want to do ABC during the day. I've got this plan, and that plan, and their spouse comes in and says, hey, we need to go to my parents' house right now. They might become very agitated. They don't like unpredictable things. They don't like overstimulated environments. So if like their wife's talking to them, the dog's barking, the kid's crying, they're probably going to get overstimulated and become very agitated. So they like a lot of predictability and control. They like to overplan everything. They overplan things 15 steps out, and then they also anticipate very negative outcomes. And they think that's a good thing because if they don't overplan, then they're being what the military calls complacent. And there's a saying that all combat veterans say, complacency kills. In other words, if you're not constantly on alert and you're not constantly anticipating things, if something bad happens, it's because you were complacent and you weren't vigilant. So they like to plan, they like to have control, they don't like unpredictability, they don't like overstimulating environments. So they don't like to anticipate and to participate in activities, partly because they believe the world is completely unsafe when you're always in danger every minute, even when you're sleeping, when you're in the shower, when you're in the porta potty, wherever you are, you're never safe ever, then they don't trust the environment and they don't trust people. They're going to feel very detached and estranged from other people. So combat veterans have a severe level of numbing. If one of my favorite books, and I have it on the end here as a resource for you, but is On Killing by Dave Grossman. If you haven't read it and you're going to treat combat veterans, I highly recommend you read that book. One of the things that he talks about in there is like just kind of normalizing some of these things that we might think are not great in a combat zone. Morbid humor, looking at people as objects or dehumanizing them, numbing out and not having emotions. He even talks about like elation, power, and adrenal rushes during the kill cycle. So people kind of go, I tell combat veterans when they come in, there's kind of 4 phases to combat. The first one is you're kind of scared, the crap out of you when you figure out, oh my gosh, this is real. This isn't simunitions. They're actually trying to kill me here. 2, I'm kind of numb. 2, I don't mind going out, and I've taken some lives and I've been aggressive. That's okay. And then if they're in combat long enough and their tour has enough violence in it, they're going to start enjoying the hunt. So you're going to have people come home and they're going to be like, oh my gosh, I can't believe how I was. I didn't care. I thought it was funny. I laughed. It didn't bother me to shoot people. I must be a horrible monster. But if we can just kind of educate them that numbing is adaptive, that it's chemical, the HPA axis, I'm not going to go into all that, but all those chemicals that are released that cause this kind of low-level shock and numbing in their deployment that help them function that way, it's functional. And usually I tell people, well, you're going to have to do the same thing whether you hate it and you're crying or if you're completely numb. Either way, you're going to be put in a situation where you're forced to survive and be protective of your peers and take lives to get through that. So it's not really their emotions that are causing these reactions, it's more the context. So I think we can really help people learn to look at their behavior in the context, and that can really help why they made decisions they did and why they did what they did. So the vets' emotions, they have an inability to feel emotions. That's part of the problem. The other part is they think that emotions are a weakness, and I do a lot of education that emotions are what make us feel connected to things. They're our intuition. It's what helps us understand people. So they really have had it, drilled into them that emotions are useless in a combat zone. You're weak if you have emotions. But when they come home and their partner's emotional, their kids are emotional, they get very uncomfortable and they usually end up angry or give their partner or their kids messages that they should be quiet, not cry, or not be upset because they're uncomfortable with the emotions themselves. So they'll give really negative messages to their family. So they have to learn to feel again, to be present in the moment, to use a lot of mindfulness, to learn how to be present with their feelings to heal. And so I think, theoretically, emotional reintegration is one of the most important things that you can do for a combat veteran to help them heal. So when they do have emotions, they're going to feel very vulnerable. They're going to feel like a lack of control. They're going to feel very exposed. And combat veterans love to have control. So it's a very hard thing for them to learn how to feel their emotions. So a lot of combat veterans always feel like they have a sense of foreshortened future. They feel like something bad's going to happen at any moment. They feel like they're just not going to live as long. In fact, a lot of them will tell you that they're going to die in a few years. They don't have any illness. There's no reason to believe that. They just do. They just think that's what's going to happen. Obviously, they have trouble falling asleep. I have to tell you, people will come in and say, oh, I can't sleep. And then after a while, you find out, oh my God, they're afraid to sleep. So that's what we have to deal with at first, is that you can't sleep or you just don't want to, because no amount of sleep meds or anything else is going to help until they realize like they can be safe sleeping. They don't have to do this. So they have irritability and outbursts of anger, like I said, whenever they feel vulnerable, whenever they feel primary emotions, whenever they feel anxious or lack of control, they'll channel it into anger. That's not a purposeful thing, but probably one of the number one things that is going to bring people into therapy is their anger. Their spouses have said, you go get some help for this anger, I'm out of here. And so they need to learn that, like they're using anger to pull back. They have difficulties concentrating for all the reasons we already said: sleep deprivation, anxiety, rarely TBI, but sometimes. A lot of these symptoms are due to all these factors we've already talked about. Every combat veteran is hypervigilant when they go out in the community. They want their back to the wall. They want to watch the exits. They're sizing up everything. And unfortunately, what that does is they're anticipating negative things all the time. They're always running negative scenarios. They're filtering their environment in a negative way. And that's actually perpetuating their anxiety. And we have to get them to see the cost of that. We have to get them to see that they're actually sustaining their anxiety and that they're interpreting things around them negatively that aren't even negative a lot of times. In other words, they're causing their own anxiety through their mindset and getting them to be more in the moment. So again, if you haven't been taught mindfulness, it's a skill that you probably need to learn so that you can help your vets do that. There's a couple of excellent apps that the VA has developed. One of them is the Ptsd Coach, which has a whole bunch of skills that vets can use on their own. And then the other one is the Mindfulness Coach, and it just really educates the vet about what mindfulness is, and then it has 20, 25 actual mindfulness exercises that they could practice to learn how to do that. They're also going to have exaggerated startle response, which I think you guys probably all know what that is. They just respond intensely to things in their environment, like they'll hit the deck when they hear a noise, or they'll suddenly jump up and get against a wall if they see something that looks suspicious, so things like that. So they have a lot of chronic dysregulation of affect. I hope as I'm talking here that you understand, like their anxiety, their anger, their numbing, their irritability, it's all over the map for all the reasons that we're talking about. So they can be very self-destructive or have suicidal behaviors, man. If you had to go into a combat zone, you had to watch your buddies die, it felt like you failed to save them. If you had to take the lives of women and children to survive, you really can come home with a damaged sense of self and feeling like a monster. The military does the vets disservice by saying, hey, we're the best trained military in the world. If you just follow your training, you will always overcome. But the truth is they don't always overcome. People die, people get injured, and every war ever. So they feel like if something bad happened, I must have done something wrong, and that's totally not true. So going back through their trauma, getting them to see the choices in the context they occurred, why these choices were made, what control they really had and didn't have, really helps unlock that and let them see that they're not to blame. Maybe they killed a child, but maybe the child was a true threat. And I always tell combat veterans, children can be lethal, and they can. So we have to remember that. They may have difficulties modulating sexual involvement. Now, we all know that, the sexual excitation level regulated by dopamine, serotonin, these chemicals in the brain. Some combat veterans will tell you that the only time that they feel calm or anxiety-free is right after they've had sex or after they come. And if you ever read that book, Generation X, he talks about how people kind of, they compulsively masturbate before they go outside the wire so that they can feel calm. So I just talk to people openly about this because they sometimes have sex addictions when they get home. They also like power and control. So sometimes they're doing some very kind of submissive, dominant things with their partner, and sometimes even some sadistic things for power. So we can look at some of these dynamics, but don't be surprised when you find all sorts of addictive behaviors like video game addiction, shopping addiction, sexual addiction, drug and alcohol addiction, these type of things, to help regulate this level of anxiety, self-esteem, and kind of chronic fight or flight symptoms. So they're going to take impulsive and do risk behaviors. They like that adrenaline. They miss it. Adrenaline's a drug, and they love it. So they want to, sometimes people will tell you the only time they feel anything and they're not numb is when they're doing something risky or when they have that adrenal drop. So that's another reason they do it. So you're going to find that people have dissociative episodes. How you're going to know that in your office is a lot of times they blink a lot more. So if you see somebody look like their eyes are kind of heavy and they start blinking and they have a distant look in their eyes, and I don't know how to describe it anyway but if they start blinking a lot, they're dissociating and they're zoning out. What that means is their body's trying to pull back from being present. You've probably hit something that you probably have memories playing for them, or you've hit some emotional topic that they're having a hard time dealing with, and that will cause some of these dissociative episodes. So especially when you're processing emotional content or anything intensive. And you stop then and you reorient the person to the environment. You're not doing any good if they're zoned out when you're trying to talk to them. So you can do that with grounding, rubbing their hands together, letting them feel the friction from that, pinching their cheeks, standing up, moving, visual grounding, having them look for shapes or colors or different things in your room to keep their eyes moving can help too. And they can have blackout periods brought on by strong triggers, so people lose chunks of time. So people will still be acting and behaving, but they have no recollection of what's happening. And a lot of times they're not doing something heinous. You can have people who do something heinous. I had a guy who was a bouncer at a bar, which he should have never been doing, by the way, because of his level of his PTSD. But he had two people who had beards and looked kind of like Middle Eastern people, and they got in his face, and he blacked out, and he ended up breaking several of their bones, and they ended up being both of them get hauled away in an ambulance. But because they were in his face, I think one of the guys actually punched him, actually. He didn't get arrested or anything, but he could have. he could have. So they can black out, they can wander around doing things that are just benign, or they can be aggressive too. So they startle. Person startles more easily. We've already talked about that. Multiple triggers in their environment, feel vulnerable when they sleep. Let's see. Of course, they can have panic attacks in relation to triggers, because once you get all those fight or flight symptoms, it can escalate into anxiety. I like to educate people on panic attack symptoms. I want to for sure explain to them the lactic acid that can be released due to hyperventilation that can cause spasming in their chest, because most of my vets think they're having a heart attack and they're not. Tightness in the chest, tightness in their throat, numbing and tingling in their extremities, their hands, their arms or legs, feeling lightheaded, dizzy, nausea, vomiting, and all these things can happen in their sleep too. So I want vets to know that they can have fight or flight symptoms during their nightmares. They can wet the bed, they can wake up nauseated, they can wake up having vomited. All these things are kind of normal due to fight or flight during nightmares. Of course, people are going to self-medicate with medications that they're prescribed, with illegal substances, even over-the-counter meds. They abuse cold medications and things like that. They're just trying to escape their anxiety. They're just trying to sleep. They don't even care if they don't sleep well. They just want to go to sleep and escape for a while. So a lot of marijuana use. A lot of these substances, they're using them because they're suppressing the central nervous system. That's kind of why we use prazosin and mini press or whatever to suppress the central nervous system to get rid of these physical symptoms of anxiety. So that's what they're doing. They're self-medicating. They don't want to have nightmares for the night. They want to be able to get to sleep. They can't escape their anxiety, anything to just kind of get away from it. Of course, they're going to have all sorts of employment problems. They really have a team mentality, and they really don't like people who don't act the way they think they should, people who don't carry their own weight, who don't have good work ethic, that don't believe in the team. Their idea is you never leave someone behind. So we have a lot of pretty lazy civilians who do the least amount of work they can for the most amount of money. So they're just not used to that, and they have a really hard time dealing with coworkers who aren't kind of work up to task as they think. So they have a hard time finding meaning in their jobs. When you go to combat and you're fighting for our country, you're making life and death decisions, you kind of have a higher purpose, and now you're working at Walmart stocking shelves. They don't find a lot of meaning in that, so they really feel like some of these menial tasks are very demeaning to them and beneath them, so they have a hard time sticking through tasks in the civilian world. They also get a lot of triggering at these different environments, loud noises, people coming up behind them, people with attitudes, these kind of things. And of course, because of all the things we've talked about, nightmares, fatigues, headaches, health issues, anxiety, they just have a hard time being in an environment that's outside of their home. So we have a lot of people who are very dependent on their service connectedness, which is the disability money that the VA gives them, or Social Security disability. You're going to find a lot of vets come in and they're on both. But they do have a lot of financial problems because it takes a long time to get those entitlements in place. Once people come out of combat and they're discharged from the military, to put in a claim for like PTSD here at the VA, it's usually going to take anywhere from 6 months to 2 years to get that claim to go through. So in the meantime, they're not having an income. So they're applying for Social Security benefits or applying for their service connectedness. In the meantime, they've gone from hazard duty pay, which is a lot higher, to just maybe their once a month drill pay, which could be, some people I know have told me they make like $124 for the entire weekend. That's not a lot of money to try to live on. So they've got financial problems. A lot of them went right from high school to the military. They've never been responsible for making choices like how to balance a budget. The military pays for their housing, for their food, for their clothes. They haven't had to do any of that. Then they're out of the military because they're medically boarded or injured or whatever, and they're having to take on things they've never done before. So we got legal charges, and I don't really have statistics on this. I'm sure Mark Mayhew in his other session went over this, but more domestic battery and assault now. What I want you to understand is combat veterans do not have a higher crime rate than the general populace. In fact, they have a lower violence and crime rate than the general population. They're people who have learned through repetition and through muscle memory how to control their aggression and their anger. So it's not really true that you're going to find more violence. But when you do, because of what we talked about, the dissociative, getting angry because they're getting triggered and don't realize it, there are going to be some instances like that. Moving violations because they're trying to drive out of the kill zone. They feel trapped when they're slowed down in traffic. When they're slowed down in a convoy, that means somebody's going to ambush them. So when they get between traffic here, they get slowed down, they want to get out of it, they'll drive crazy to get away from people, drive 100 miles an hour if they have to. So they get vehicle charges, DUIs for self-medication, resisting arrest. You put your hands on a combat veteran, they may take that as a threat and black out. Now they fight the police and they don't even know they're doing it, and then when they come to you, they're arrested and they have multiple charges. I've had that happen to more than one person. So in your office, you're going to find out they miss appointments. They have trouble dealing with their lives. They don't sleep well, they don't feel well, they have headaches, they're afraid of going outside of their home. Their home is the only place they feel safe. So you're going to find out they're very avoidant and they don't show up as much. Please don't give up on them. Give them more chances than the average person. Talk to them about it. You know, encourage them, set some boundaries sometimes, but give them more chances because they are going to be more non-compliant than most patients. They're going to arrive irritable because they're going to have multiple triggers on the way to your office. They're going to want to sit with their back to the wall. They're going to seem distracted. You're going to see that they're anxious. They don't always remember what you told them from the previous session, especially if they got a TBI. Or they're just so anxious they just can't absorb things. They're so busy listening on what's going on in the hall, or they're so distracted by intrusive memories, or, you know, they're just having a headache or whatever it is. They're just not always going to remember. They don't like eye contact. People who stare at them in combat, that's interesting when they go on a mission, when something's going to go bad, either the streets are empty or people, the villagers, are standing staring at them. And so for them, staring and looking at people's eyes intensely is usually a danger indicator or a challenge. So they don't like to make direct eye contact a lot. They're going to zone out. They're going to get agitated. It's always good to give somebody a timeout if they get agitated, because they can usually regroup. I'll be like, hey, why don't you go walk around 5-10 minutes? Why don't you go down and have a cigarette if you smoke? Just come back when you're calmed down. And like 99% of the time they do calm down and they come back and we can just resume our session. So just, you know, just let them have a moment. I think it's always important to involve the veteran support system if you can in their therapy. Like, I love to have a spouse present during the first few sessions when I'm educating them about all the things we're talking about today, because then they're like, oh my gosh, now I understand why he or she is doing this. You know, oh my gosh, I thought they were just being a jerk, or oh, they're isolating, they don't talk about their trauma because XYZ. I want the partner and the family to understand what's going on. I want to minimize distractions. I want to have a quiet environment where the veteran can be safe. I always have my door closed while they're in here. I have a direct path between them and the door. If they get mad, they can leave. They don't need to assault me to get me out of the way. I want a direct path between them and the door. And if they get mad, they can leave. They can step out. Or if they escalate too much, I can ask them to leave, and there's nothing obstructing their way. If they get into an office where you're closest to the door and they're sitting away from the door, they're not going to even listen to you the whole time. That's all they're going to be thinking about, is that they're trapped in your office. So let them sit closest to the door and let them have a clear path to it. Be able to develop small incremental goals. They have a very ingrained sense of, you know, safety, of not being willing to do things, to change their mentality. They think we're very naive. Oh, they've seen the truth. They've been to combat, they've seen how evil people are, and all people are capable of that, including you and me and everyone else. And so they think giving up some of these behaviors, like being vigilant or not trusting people or not going out, is stupid. They think like, oh, well, you're going to get hurt and you're going to be complacent, and then somebody, you know, all these bad things are going to happen. So it's very hard to get them out of that ingrained mentality of vigilance and anticipating negative events all the time. You can develop checklists for the veteran to follow, you know, just like small goals. They're used to having an op order. That's a step-by-step order of what they're supposed to do every day. So, you know, little things written down, goals for them is good. They're very task-oriented people typically. They like to fix everything. So if you give them a goal and tell them it's an op order, or, you know, that they're on a mission, you use some of their lingo, you might get a lot farther with them. So, especially for people who have memory issues, I'm going to write down bullet point instructions on what they're supposed to do for homework. I cheat and I email people things I want them to do, but I make sure I don't put any PHI in it. I don't put their name on it. I don't put my name on it. I don't put that, you know, I'm a psychologist. I'm just like, hey, do this, do that, download the Ptsd Coach, download the mindfulness coach, and then I'll just write Heidi and I'll send it to them. There's no confidential really information on there that could be disturbing to anybody. Reduce stimulation to help minimize distractions. So again, turn off your screensaver. Never have people walking behind them, or, you know, loud things going on around them. That's all they're going to do is listen to that. For people with TBI, reduce your rate of speech. We already talked about that. For people with TBI, I offer an order them marker boards, and I have them write down 3 or 4 tasks they're going to do. It could be laundry, like do laundry, washer, dryer, fold and put away. And I have them just cross off as they go, and the multiple tasks they want for the day. And what happens with that is they can't remember what they were doing, they get disoriented, they can say, what was I supposed to do today? They can go back to their marker board and they can cross off the task as they go, and they'll figure out which step they were on. The other thing is their partner can help them too by putting tasks they were supposed to do on the day, and that helps the partner be less frustrated, and they're working on tasks together. They can use, I order these huge marker boards, and one half of it can be used for like appointments, or whatever else you want. But I think appointments on one side, tasks on the other, to help get them more organized, because they're very easily overwhelmed. I definitely, for people with TBI, order a lot of prosthetics, the marker boards, and the and markers to self-cue to help structure, break down tasks. I order people Echo Dots like it's candy, because on Echo Dots you can have them set a reminder to take their meds. Set a reminder, hey, Echo, Alexa, set a reminder. When do you want your reminder? 10 minutes from now, she'll say, setting a reminder for 6:30. And what do you want the reminder to say? Take the pizza out of the oven. And when the time comes, she'll say, take the pizza out of the oven, and she'll keep repeating it until the vet says, hey, Alexa, stop. So you can use that for reminders. We should have them put, while they're with you, all their appointments in their phone and set alarms. That's the only way they're ever going to remember. People with TBI they can't remember anything. They're completely disorganized. So when you want them to show up for an appointment, you're either going to have to call them and remind them they have an appointment, or have them set an alarm in their phone. These are the best ways. Digital voice recorders, they can record where they parked at a parking lot. Hey, I'm over by section C, and as you come out the main door, you go to the right, or whatever. They can record where they put their car. If they can't remember stuff that they've read, they can record a summary to themselves. So they can use these digital voice recorders for all sorts of compensatory strategies. Remember that they have significant concentration memory issues. People with TBI are not good at multitasking, so you're going to want to tell them one thing at a time. If I tell a person with TBI, hey, you go out the door, turn left, go down the hall, and then go down the stairs, they're going to be like, okay, I go out the door. We're going to remember one thing. So if you have a multi-step direction that you need them to do, write it down, bullet point it, and give it to them. They're much more likely to comply. If you have homework, give them something tangible to look at, to remind them what they cover. Let them record your sessions if you want to. You're not recording them, they're recording them. But combat veterans are very paranoid about being recorded. But you can order them a digital voice recorder, and they can record themselves, or they can buy a digital voice recorder themselves. Give them information in small chunks, like we talked about. Slow down your rate of speech. Don't talk down to them. Have them reflect back what they heard you say, so they've at least processed it and gotten the gist of it. If they don't have eye contact with you, especially people with TBI, they're probably not listening to you. They're zoned out, spaced out. So just in treatment with people with PTSD, always give them a judge-free zone. As soon as they think you've judged them for killing a kid, for doing something outside of what was necessary, like some of them have chopped off fingers and tortured people. Some of them have taken lives beyond what they are supposed to, and we shouldn't be judging them for that. We should be asking them what happened that even made that possible. I'm not going to judge you, but you need to have a space to talk about it. Let's talk about it. I'll also tell them, if you don't want me to document this, I won't. So like, let's say they killed a kid or shot a child or something like that, which is one of the main things they really struggle with, then I'll say, hey, I'm just going to put in your chart, process an episode involving a minor. I'm not going to put the details. That way, anybody in this hospital who can read that isn't going to see those confidential and very private struggles of that veteran. It's nobody's business but his or hers. And so just know that aggression is the norm. I mean, they're used to being angry. That's where they kind of function the best. It's hard to get them back to their emotional level, but they have to be aggressive to survive. Acting outside of what is necessary happens a lot more than you would think. In other words, they're overly aggressive, and they come home with a lot of regrets about that. And I just always tell people, anything a person can do is human. So no matter how, don't be judgmental. No matter what they tell you, say, you don't know how you would do things if you were in a combat zone, if somebody was hunting you all year, if you were sleep deprived, if you watched your buddies die in front of you, if you had to shoot children and watch people get blown to smithereens and scoop guts off the ground with a shovel of people you love, you too may get aggressive. So you just got to kind of stick with it and realize these people have been to hell and back, and your job is to care about them and show them love and empathy and help them get from A to B. They're going to hide their vulnerability under anger. We talked about that. We need to reintegrate their emotions. We have to work on making them let go of safety beliefs, like the in vivo exposure with prolonged exposure is very good. Getting them to go out, but practicing filtering the environment differently, letting go of the anticipatory, what if this, what if that. I always say not what if, but what is. Get them to understand that anticipatory thinking steals their moments, and always think about their behavior in the context they happen. Most of these people have killed people and been very aggressive. They came home and they haven't done any of that. So what does that tell us? That's not who they are. It's the context that they were in that caused most of that. So these are the resources I'd recommend. You know, whether you love the government or not, there's the National Center for PTSD, excellent website, has all the latest research on PTSD, PTSD resources, a whole bunch of pamphlets you can print out on what is PTSD. You can print them out. You don't have to be a part of the VA, and you put them in your lobby. Same with the Defense and Veterans Brain Injury Center, or the DVBIC. And then, of course, the #1 book for if you're going to treat people with PTSD. If you're going to treat a combat veteran you haven't read on killing, you've really missed out. So I want to tell you. So that is pretty much the end of my presentation. I really appreciate you guys listening. I know that was a lot of information crammed into a very short period of time, but I hope it helps you, and I hope that you can go out and serve these combat veterans who have just been through so much and so selflessly served our country.